Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Mayor Rich Hill with the Village of Round Lake Beach, and welcome to another one of our Fireside Chats. Tonight, my guest is Brad Cole. He's the Executive Director of the Illinois Municipal League down in Springfield, Illinois. They take care of all of our municipalities throughout the state, over 1,200 of them. Just for transparency's sake, I'll also mention I'm on the IML Board of Directors. Interviewing Brad today, talk a little bit about what's happening. In fact, Brad just came from the governor's address down in Springfield. He did that at noon today, and he's here today to share with us some of his insights from both that and a lot of other things that are happening in Springfield. Welcome, Brad.
Thank you, Mayor. Glad to be here.
Brad's been with the Illinois Municipal League since 2014. Before that, he was with PepsiCo. He also worked for Senator Mark Kirk and several other jobs. He was Mayor of Carbondale for 8 years and trustee for 4 years before that. So he actually has experience doing what we do as mayors and elected officials, which helps tremendously in your role with the IML. Very glad today. We also have several other mayors with us here today. Thank you for being here, gentlemen. Brad, a couple things. I read your bio, and I was going to read it out today, but it had so much about the Illinois Municipal League in there I was going to ask you. I thought I'd better not read the whole thing. So can you tell us a little bit of history about the Illinois Municipal League?
Sure, and thanks for the invitation to be here. Certainly welcome to everybody that's here tonight, the mayors, and especially Mayor Rockingham, who's also one of our officers for the Municipal League this year. So glad to be back in Lake County and Round Lake Beach. The Municipal League was founded in 1913. Formerly was, prior to that, was a startup group, the Illinois Association of Mayors, and formed into the Municipal League at that time to represent the needs of the municipalities throughout the state. From north to south, east to west, every municipality, which now is 1,298 cities, villages, and towns, range in population from 14 to 2.5 million. And we represent all of them. We are a voluntary membership organization, and so that means that communities can join if they like. They don't have to, but they are authorized to by state law. And we have about 98% membership in the league. So communities from all over the state participate in the Municipal League. They take part in our programs and services, and we're happy to provide those to them.
Well, we all share a common goal. We all have residents that all have services that we need to provide. And it's nice that we have a sounding board and someone that will voice for us down south as well as throughout the national also. Thank you. As a former mayor, how do you believe that experience assists you in your role as IML director?
I think it's been very helpful, and interestingly, when I was mayor, I served on the IML Board of Directors for half a dozen years, was 8 years in office as mayor, and 4 years on our city council. That gave me the awareness of the issues that were not just facing our community, which was Carbondale in deep southern Illinois, but across the state, because I interacted with many of other mayors, just like you do, and those that are here tonight. I think that experience also allows me to have a heightened degree of credibility when dealing with the General Assembly and the administration, because they know that I've been there. So when we're advocating for an issue, they know that I actually understand it, or I should understand it, and can speak from experience. So I think it's a plus. I don't know that it's necessary at all times for whoever has this position to have that experience, but I certainly think it's worthwhile, and I would encourage that going forward. It's been helpful to me also because I understand the issues better myself. So I think the people on the outside see that we have the experience internally, and internally we're able to understand things better.
I've noticed the same benefit when we have state legislators, or the representatives or senators that used to be mayors or trustees. As they move up to those positions, they better understand what we go through in our roles and why the way the state makes changes affects us so tremendously, and that's been great.
They do understand it. They don't always vote the same way they would if they were a mayor, but they do understand it.
Yes.
Yeah.
How is IML funded, and is it a governmental agency?
It is not a governmental agency. It's a nonprofit association of the cities, villages, and towns, like I indicated. It's funded through our membership and through other programs and services that we provide to our membership. We also offer publications and training, education courses, and things that we do for service to our members that are provided at a nominal fee. So we collect dues money, we host seminars and conferences that generate some funds, and then we provide other services that generate funds. It's a small operation. You indicated that I was with Pepsi. I managed 5 states for Pepsi Mid-America prior to coming to IML. And interestingly, when I sat down on the job at IML, I asked for our budget, and it was on one piece of paper. And I was used to about 200 pages coming from the corporate world. And that took a little bit of adapting for me, but that's how we're funded.
Streamlined organization.
Yes, much easier org chart.
Now remember, I'm asking you only for the benefit of the audience. I do know the answers to many of these. What is the organizational structure of the IML?
Well, you're on our board. The organizational structure for the Municipal League, not unlike other statewide associations, has a board of directors that is selected from its membership. And as I said, our membership is all sizes and all communities. We have 45 members of our board of directors right now. There's, by our bylaws, 39 members, 3 officers, and 36 board members. And then anyone who has been a president of the association, as long as they're in office, stays on our board. So we have, that number fluctuates a little bit. So right now we have 45 board members. They're selected regionally. We have North, Central, and South regions to make sure that every area of the state is represented. We have an internal process to solicit applications or nominations for our board. The board is only made up of mayors and village presidents and town presidents. Those applications or nominations are received, it goes to a nominating committee, and then that committee presents its recommendation to our full membership at our annual conference, and the full membership votes on the board to actually elect the members. They serve annually. Most of the time, if somebody is elected to our board, they stay on the board as long as they're in office, if they wish to continue. We have had very limited instances where people have gone off the board, but then once they are not in office locally, they're no longer eligible to serve. I kind of appreciate this as a good reminder for me. I'm learning a little bit too.
Can you tell us a little bit more about your role with the IML? What's your day like? Where do you go? What do you do?
Every day is different. Our base is in Springfield. My job takes me to all parts of the state, and I try to get around. I try to visit all of our board communities and as many of our actual member communities as possible. As I said, we have 1,298 municipalities. I have a list in my car that I keep, and to date I've been to just about, I think, 900 municipalities in the last 4 years and 2 months. So it's, now that's not always spending the night. That may just be passing through or a meeting with the elected officials. But my day will start in some community, and it will either be dealing with the General Assembly in Springfield, or maybe the administration or state agency, or I'll be meeting with local officials or trying to address local issues. We also represent our members at the federal level. You mentioned that briefly. So oftentimes I'll be attending meetings or maybe a conference or a seminar in Washington or something that relates to our federal advocacy. But my day is entirely focused on our members, and our staff will tell you that. That is what drives me and what I think drives our organization. So it could be that we're reviewing budget numbers, or we're reviewing agency rules, or we're reviewing legislation, or we're handling a request or an inquiry from a member. It could be a legal advocacy issue, it could be a legislative advocacy issue. Today I received a phone call from an ex-mayor who was on our board a couple of decades ago and attended a city council meeting last night as a guest of a developer who was there to have some action taken at the meeting. And this ex-mayor called and said, "I'm not sure they had a quorum at the meeting last night. Does this count?" And I said, "Yes, it does." He says, "Okay, good." So we get a lot of questions from folks, and we get a lot of inquiries from the media. Our job, I think, is to provide answers to people about local government and about the things that our members do.
Are there other municipal leagues in the state, and if so, how do they interact with the Illinois Municipal League?
There is only one municipal league, the statewide association. Each state has one, with the exception of the state of Hawaii, which Hawaii only has one municipality. All of the islands are counties, except the city and county of Honolulu. And so every state has a statewide municipal league. In Illinois, we also have regional councils of government, and those represent regions within the state. They are not part of the Illinois Municipal League, so they're not a direct affiliation. They are a separate entity that is formed locally. But there are 17 of those regional councils of government. And so we work with all 17 of those regional councils, including the Lake County Municipal League, and we provide information to them, try to gather information from them, because we're all serving the same members.
A couple of weeks ago, you had come up here for our legislative breakfast we had with our local Lake County legislators. And we talked about our local legislative agenda. Can you tell us a little bit about the Illinois Municipal League's legislative agenda?
It is, every session, every legislative session is different, and it is particularly interesting this year because we have a new General Assembly with supermajorities in both the House and Senate with the Democrats, and a new Democrat governor. Our legislative agenda is developed throughout the year and approved finally by our board. This year, the primary issue is public safety pension fund reform and consolidation. And I'll be glad to get into that in some detail if you like, either now or later.
Let's do it now, yes.
Okay. So there are 653 downstate public safety pension funds. Downstate is everything outside of the city of Chicago. So whether it's here or actually
downstate?
Downstate, the downstate public safety pension funds, there are 653 of those funds. Our number one legislative agenda item is to consolidate and reform that system so that we can create efficiencies and save money, not reduce benefits to pensioners or change anything in the system, but to be able to put more money into the funds instead of paying more money into the bureaucracy or the administration. This has been an issue that we've developed over the last several years since I've been at IML and prior to that, but we have been focused on this. This year it's our number one legislative agenda issue, and we're pleased to see Governor Pritzker last week announce the formation of a task force that will help lead this discussion. We have a pension reform working group that is made up of mayors that will help lead this issue for us. So hopefully we can see some change there, which will keep more money into those funds to be able to pay the pensioners, but also to relieve some of the stress that's on municipalities having to make those contributions. So that's number one. I like to say around the office that all of our issues are number one. They're all tied for first place. That one is first among equals, I would say, though. As far as the other number ones on our legislative agenda, we want to see the funds that are due to municipalities being sent to municipalities in a timely way. So we'd like to see the automatic appropriation of local funds, whether it's motor fuel tax or 911 fees or video or casino gaming dollars. We'd like to eliminate some of the fees that have been placed by the state on local governments. The state of Illinois says the state is the only one that can collect sales tax. So you have no option to collect it locally. And now the state says they're going to charge you to do that. So we're trying to eliminate that fee. That's a new fee. It's been in place just 2 fiscal years. We're trying to allow for the collection of local sales tax online for purchases of goods over the internet out of state. There was the South Dakota v. Wayfair case, this U.S. Supreme Court decision this past year that allowed for collection of use tax, which is similar to sales tax, but not the full local percentage. And so we're trying to move that agenda. And then we also have a number of items that would expand authority for non-home rule entities. Home rule is granted by population. Anybody automatically receives home rule status if you're over 25,000 in population, or if you adopt it by referendum. There are 215 home rule communities in Illinois. That means there's over 1,000 that are not, and those communities don't have the same authority. So we're trying to expand some basic authority to allow for additional regulatory and revenue sources for non-home rule communities, and we're trying to do that through statutory change this year. That generally encompasses our legislative agenda. It's about a dozen bills, and 7 bills on the pension side alone, so it's a dozen plus the 7. That's our, what we call offense, but we also play a lot of defense. And there, I was talking earlier, I said there's 6,271 bills that have been filed in the General Assembly this spring as of the Friday deadline. we'll have to play defense on several hundred of those. In fact, we're tracking about 600 right now that we've taken a position on or are reviewing to take a position on. And so in addition to what we want to promote, we're going to want to try to stop some things that will be bad for communities and their residents. So.
Well, I agree with everything you're saying. Myself and some of the local mayors from the Round Lake area do meet on a monthly or semi-monthly basis, and a lot of times our discussions revolve around different areas we'd like to work together. And that being Round Lake Beach is home rule because we're 28,000 residents.
Right.
They are not. And sometimes that becomes a sticking point. It's, okay, we can do this, oh, we can't do that, okay, can't do that. It would certainly be nice if that were to pass to give them the same authority that we have. I don't see any reason why not. I'm sure the state has their reasons, but I don't understand what they are.
Well, and if I can go into home rule just a little
Please.
bit further. So home rule was created by the 1970 Constitution. And in the formation through the Constitutional Convention that developed the state constitution at that time, home rule status was decided to grant to communities over the population or the referendum threshold to do whatever they wanted that the state hasn't said they can't do. Mm-hmm. So if the state says this is under the purview of state authority, then home rule communities can't do that. But if the state hasn't said that, then home rule can do pretty much whatever they want to do. Of course, as long as it's legal, I suppose. But there is a much broader authority. Non-home rule communities can only do what the state says they can do. So there has to be permission for a non-home rule community to enact local building codes, or to enter into intergovernmental agreements, or to issue debt for infrastructure projects like wastewater or water treatment plants. If the state hasn't said they can do it, then they cannot. Where home rule, if the state hasn't said you cannot, you can. And we think that there should be more parity. We don't think that everybody should have home rule status because it is a lot of authority, but it's vested in the local leaders, and so we think it should be expanded to those, in many ways, to those non-home rule communities.
And you started out with the pension issue. All of us fully understand the pensions. We've spent a lot of money. We probably invest $1 million a year in the police pension fund. And there are local public works and other workers in the village already have the Illinois Municipal League fund, Illinois Municipal Retirement
MRF.
Fund. Mm-hmm. That it's a statewide organization where all the villages send all their money together. Everyone has their own account in there, though. So just because I put my money in, you put your money in, doesn't mean that if we're down 50%, we each got to pay 50%. If I put in 75% of my money and Brad puts in 25% of his, they know that. Right. So we still owe what we owe, and that's it. But the benefits of having so much money together and the money managers being invested properly can save you so much. You look at what we spend on investment counselors, the training we have to do for the pension board members and so forth. It's a lot of money, and that's just our village. Imagine that at 1,200 villages in the whole state. And that's what we're looking at doing. Combining it all together in one fund, separate accounts, but one set of managers. And you look at, I think we are the best funded pension plan in the state.
IMRF is the second largest and the best funded and best managed fund in the state. And just to take a little bit further what you were talking about, when I said there are 653 funds, the best example I could give is if you had 653 people and they each had a checking account. Mm-hmm. Would you have 653 banks? Each person has their own bank, which has their own overhead, their own administration, their own process, their own everything. Or would you rather have one bank with 653 accounts in it so that you can create some economy of scale? Now then the question is, well, okay, Brad, your account is overdrawn. Mayor Hill's account is flush with lots of cash. So the issue of these funds, what if a fund is underfunded and one is overfunded? Do those funds commingle? Does one offset the other? No. Just like if my checking account is overdrawn, you don't have money taken out of yours to support mine. And so the funds are kept separately. They're separate by law. They can't be swept by the state of Illinois. They're not state funds. It's a separate entity. And so that's really the example we try to give is, would you rather have 653 banks or would you have one bank with 653 accounts? Which one's going to do a better job of serving your needs?
Right, absolutely. And as you mentioned, there's no downgrading the benefits. The benefits stay exactly the same they are. It just allows the villages and the residents and taxpayers to fund those a little easier than what we're doing right now.
There's only one person in the state of Illinois that gets the bill for anything that we do, and that's the taxpayer.
Right.
And the taxpayer can only pay so much. And if we can save money, but still meet the obligations, shouldn't we?
Just like we do with any other service, whether it be snow plowing or anything like that. If we can find a way to do it better, faster, cheaper, we'll do that for the residents, as long as we don't downgrade the service.
Right.
Great. Well, we talked about a lot of the local issues already and what the state's doing here. Maybe you can tell us a little bit more about the federal system. I know we had a few items that we talked about with the federals. The Wayfair eliminated one of those big ones that we had out there that we were really pushing for, the Marketplace Fairness Act.
So our advocacy extends to our national capital. It's not just at state capital. And we work closely with the members of Congress, and there were several that were here at the, couple that were here at the Lake County Municipal League's legislative breakfast. And I've talked with a couple of them since then, in fact. Our effort at the national level is to make sure that we're aware of issues that are happening at the federal government level and share that with our members. And then also to promote legislation that can help generally municipalities in Illinois. One of those this year on our agenda is to promote a national capital infrastructure plan. The president has talked about this, but there hasn't been a national capital infrastructure plan for many years. We've seen Tiger grants and other transportation grants, but not a real national capital infrastructure plan. This is also being talked about at the state level, but then also we're promoting broadband development, and we're working with the Federal Communications Commission to make sure that they don't overreach into municipal authority in trying to promote their own interests. So we want to make sure that Illinois communities have a voice at the table in those discussions in the federal regulatory realm. And then we're still talking about the National Marketplace Fairness Act, because there could be a legislative resolution to the South Dakota v. Wayfair case. The Congress could decide to act. I doubt that they will now that that decision's been made. But we do keep in touch with the administration and with Congress, not just Illinois representatives and senators, but those around the country. A few years ago, as a part of the national tax rewrite, the tax code bill that was adopted 2 years ago, we were the lead in promoting the maintenance of tax-exempt municipal bonds in the tax code. So I helped lead that charge from all those municipal leagues across the state, met with members of the House Ways and Means Committee, majority, minority representatives, to make sure they understood that this was an issue for all municipalities across the state. All 19,000 municipalities in the country wanted the protection of tax-exempt municipal bonds, but we had to tell them that. And so we were successful. Now, it took a lot of people to get that done, but the Illinois Municipal League was right in the middle of it, in fact, leading the charge. And our IML board allows us the opportunity to take that type of leadership role because it benefits our members as well.
Well, I appreciate your being able to do that and do it so well.
Thank you.
As you mentioned earlier, the state government of Illinois is pretty much all a one-party system now, supermajorities and all. How does that affect your lobbying efforts for legislation?
It's interesting.
Next question?
Next question. You know, Illinois is a diverse state, and our legislature is a diverse body, but it is dominated by one central political theme, and so it is heavily democratically controlled. For us, that's good on issues that are generally supported by Democrats. It's bad on issues that are generally not supported by Democrats. We think that our issues don't have party labels. We know that whether you fix the road or the toilet flushes, these are not political issues. And the potholes don't have party affiliations. So sometimes it's difficult for us because the political system overwhelms common sense and nonpartisan issues. Sometimes I will point out that we can't always apply logic and reason to our arguments. I say that tongue-in-cheek because we know that we're on the side of right most of the time, and it's hard to get the legislature to do things. But the fact that the supermajorities are there and the governor's office is in the same party, it's not new. We've been through that before. Yeah. Sometimes the check and balance of opposing political ideologies is good. We'll see how it goes this time.
One thing that we've been talking about for years and years and years is the Local Government Distributive Fund, LGDF. That's the income tax that the state of Illinois taxpayers pay that the municipality is supposed to get 10% of based on an agreement back in 1970 when they were writing the Constitution. We were given that kind of as a trade-off to not having our own income tax that we could apply to our own residents. Since that point, there have been some changes along the way. The income tax has gone up. We maintained what our percentage was of the original part. When it went up to 5%, we did not get the additional. The state held on to the whole thing. 2 years ago, they had actually had the same formula for us, but they took another 10%. Last year, they took another 5% away from us. So at least it got less. And this year, the budget for the governor is going to, right now, includes another 5% reduction. So for us, it's about $100,000 just for Round Lake Beach. When you take that across the whole state, it's got to be millions and millions of dollars. Do you see any change in that, or how do we approach that this year?
So the issue of LGDF is directly tied to income tax, and as you explained it adequately, if you believe that there is an income tax, then you have to say there is a local share because of the way this was implemented originally and agreed to in 1969. So you can't say that, well, we like the state income tax, but we don't like the local share, because there would not be one without the other. The agreement of the mayors at the time to support a state income tax allowed that to be implemented.
Right.
Now that is historical. Sometimes that's forgotten, but we try to remind people about it. We saw a reduction in our rate when the income tax was increased, so that the dollar amount that was collected was not reduced. So we were essentially held harmless, but we didn't see the gain either. So the state took their gain and we didn't get our gain. At the same time, more unfunded mandates pushed down to local governments, more obligations pushed down to local governments. 2 years ago, the budget included a 10% cut in that number. Last year, which is this current fiscal year, that was cut in half, so it was only a 5% cut off of that number. And we were hopeful and are hopeful that next year in the state 2020 budget, we will be able to get back to that full dollar amount, not the original full 10%, even though there is legislation that's been introduced and we were able to get passed out of committee last week to do that. So we're hopeful that we'll get back to that full amount, because it is the great equalizer for distribution of income taxes to municipalities. Doesn't matter how big you are or how small you are, you get the same share. And it allows you to do the things that your residents need done and expect to be done. The governor's budget today kept it at that 95% mark, which we're hopeful we can get increased. I was there at the budget address today in Springfield, and we released information to our members about that. And we'll continue to be working on that issue. It really is the core issue for financial concerns of municipalities. It is the foundation. The revenue sharing is the foundation of most municipalities' budgets. Even though they have sales tax and other things and property tax, that really is the only piece that we've been able to rely upon, and it's been chipped away at a little bit.
Yeah, when we build our budgets and we pass our budgets by May 1st each year, and then the legislature makes a change in July, it's like, okay, our budget's already passed, now what?
Right.
Yeah.
And that's what we tell them. We tell them, you know, by law, we're required to pass balanced budgets, and we do that on time, which is not consistent with the state of Illinois. So when the General Assembly adopts a budget and the governor enacts it sometime in June or July or 2 years later, as happened a couple of years ago, municipalities have already put that budget out, and they've made their estimates and their expectations based on the information that we have available. We try to offer revenue estimates, and we've done a pretty good job, I would say.
Yes.
We've been within, tenths of percent within our estimates to be able to predict what will be coming in, but we have to do that based on not knowing what's actually going to happen. So we do encourage folks to adopt their budget conservatively. And this year we'll encourage you to adopt your budget on the 95% ratio of LGDF. And if we're able to get that to 100, then it's a little bit of an extra buffer for you later. If you budget for 100% and we only get 95, then you're going to have to make other decisions later. And it's always easier to tuck a little bit extra away if you get it than it is to have to come up with it.
Yes, we have found that out over the years, yes. Yes.
Now don't forget, Mayor, I'm on your side on this. So,
I know.
Yeah.
We appreciate that too. I've been going to the IML conference now since 1995, and it's always been a great learning experience for me. Unfortunately, we have a lot of press in the state that always writes articles saying how much money the village has spent. I don't think they really understand how key that is to educating our trustees and our village board and our mayors about how things work, the new laws that are out there, how the best way to do things. We have benefited tremendously here. So maybe you could speak on that a little bit as far as how everyone across the state benefits.
Sure. Our annual conference, and we're in our 105th year of our annual conference, is really the one-stop shop for any local official, whether it's an appointed official or an elected official, to be able to get training. And oftentimes the training is mandated by the state of Illinois.
That's true.
So it's interesting to us when we read an article from our friends in the news industry to say, well, look how much was spent on this training, when in fact it's required by the state to have that training. And there are varying positions that have requirements for training, but it is required for many positions. And we provide that at a reasonable rate, just a few $100s. We haven't increased those rates in a long time. We do get a little bit of criticism because the conference is always held in Chicago. And the issue with that is that there is no other place we could hold the conference but Chicago, because we have to have several thousand hotel rooms, and we have to have 100,000 square feet of meeting space and exhibit space, and we can bring everybody together under one roof and offer nearly 75 different sessions over a 3-day period. Right. It's really a great opportunity. So we encourage people to attend, obviously, not for our benefit, but for theirs. And for the people that do attend, sometimes they get criticized in the press or by their residents or constituents and say, well, why are you spending all this money? And I would come back, and I did this myself. I attended as an elected official. And when somebody would ask me, well, you spent $1,000 on hotel and registration, all you did was go to Chicago. Okay, well, here's the things that we came back with. But by the way, your barber is required to have a license, required to have a certain number of hours just to be able to cut your hair. Don't you want your mayor to have some training? Your plumber, your electrician, your mechanic, your doctor, your lawyer. Would you go to any of those people if they weren't certified or had training in the best practices and the current information? No, of course you wouldn't. Why would you want your local officials to be any different? Wouldn't you want your city or village to be run by people who know what's going on and have interaction with other local officials and are able to learn those best practices and able to meet other officials? Because one of the big benefits is to talk to your colleagues from around the state. And I would dare say that if somebody who was from a village in Lake County didn't attend a conference, a statewide conference, you might not meet the mayor of Vandalia, Illinois, or Effingham, or Macomb. And so it gives you an opportunity to build a network that benefits the community.
Yeah, we all share so many similar problems and solutions that if we start discussing an issue, oftentimes you find the solution right in that room. It's amazing.
Yes. And so we know that sometimes it's easy to criticize, but we encourage people to attend, and we encourage them to have that conversation with people who are critical about it. And the newspaper folks, they're going to do what they're going to do, yes. And that's fine. They talk to us about it.
Also, the vendors that are there. We have a huge floor full of vendors. In a couple hours, you can see so many different vendors. So if you're looking, I don't know, you want to build a swimming pool for your park district, you want to put new street lighting in, you want to find out about the latest technology for police cars, you can hit all those different vendors in one boom, just done, and find it all out without spending weeks and weeks trying to gather that information.
We have almost 150 vendors that come to our conference to exhibit. And that's everywhere from somebody who makes and sells fire hydrants to codifiers that put together the city code and the ordinances, to people that sell other services or promote other goods, and state agencies. And I want to particularly mention that because there was legislation last year that did not go anywhere. It's been proposed again this year to restrict the ability of state agencies to purchase a booth, an exhibit, or rent an exhibit booth, and to get information out. So for instance, say the Illinois Housing Development Authority has programs where a community could benefit from grants, or there's just programs and services that communities could utilize.
Right.
There have been some members of the General Assembly that say, well, state agencies shouldn't be spending that money to go. And I said in committee, okay, that's fine. Would you like those agencies to then spend the next 5 years driving around to see all 1,298 communities? Right. Or would you like them to be able to spend 3 days and let everybody walk right past them, right, and pick up the brochure and get the information and answer the questions? Because as I said, I've only been to 900 communities and I'm trying to go to all of them. And those state agencies, they don't have the resources to do that. So we make it available for our members' benefit, but also for those state agencies and other entities to be able to interact. So it's a good tool, it's a good opportunity.
Yeah, I would agree. Even in business, you see, they send their staff to training all over the country, and sometimes they're a 3-day conference, sometimes they're a 2-hour training. But the benefits you can receive on those types of events, and you talk about the networking with other people. Boy, just can't say enough about it.
About 3 months ago, I wrote an article in our magazine that talked about training and some of the criticism about it. Mm-hmm. It was right after our last conference, and I said, you wouldn't take your cat to a veterinarian that didn't receive regular training. Why wouldn't you treat your mayor the same? You want your mayor to get the regular training, the up-to-date information. And if you don't, then talk to me about where you take your cat when he's sick. I'm a Southern boy, so some stuff's a little simple for me. I don't know.
That's pretty much all the items I wanted to bring up. We talked about some of them throughout other conversations here. Is there anything that I missed that you wanted to bring up that's important that maybe the public should know about the IML?
Well, our services are based on what our members need. We try to react positively to issues that come up. It is difficult to manage the gap between the small communities and large communities. So I said 14 to 2.5 million. If you could just guess, those communities might have some differing opinions. And then we have everybody in the middle. And then also there's regional concerns. And so somebody in Lake County or a northwestern suburb of Chicago might have a different need than somebody in western Illinois or even northwestern Illinois, and certainly southern Illinois or central Illinois. So our job is sometimes complicated because we try to balance all of the communities that we serve. And communities will often say, well, that's not something that we care about. Why are you worried about it? Well, it doesn't affect you, but it does affect about 500 other communities. And the other way too sometimes, hey, this is a really big deal to me. Okay, well, nobody else cares. And so we have to balance that, and we want to represent and try to represent everybody in that process. And sometimes the positions we take on legislation are difficult because we may have a bill that we think is really good for 1,000 communities and going to be kind of bad for maybe 50. And what do? So we might try to make it as good as we can for both sides and then say, we're just down the middle on it, we're neutral on it. We've gotten it as good as we can for this group, and we've gotten it better, not as bad for this group. And so that is something I try to remind folks, that it's not a one-size-fits-all. And we try to balance that. We determine our positions on legislation based on approval by our board of directors and our principles and policies that says these are the things that we care about. So we try to implement that in all these 6,000 bills and all the other things that we do. But sometimes it's difficult. That's where it's helpful to have good partners like the regional councils of government, like here in Lake County, and the others throughout the state, the 17 total regional councils throughout the state, so that we say, look, here we are statewide. If you have a different opinion regionally, that's okay.
Yes.
So you can support or oppose something that maybe we feel differently about, and that's okay. So it's just like your kitchen table. Maybe you have differing opinions on, you know, one end thinks this is good and one side thinks that's bad, but you still got to come together, and that's what we try to do.
And it's worked out very well so far. We always have, like I said, different opinions. That's why we're all individuals and individual villages, but that's what makes us all so unique. We have a little time for questions. Anyone in the audience have any questions for Brad? Yes, we have a microphone here.
You mentioned the expansion of home rule, and that you realize that not all communities, maybe not that community of 14.
Right.
What criteria are you looking at to expand the opportunity for home rule?
So we've done two different things. This year we have statutory changes in very select areas that the General Assembly can say, we'll give you this authority. So it's not straight home rule authority, but statutorily we could say, you can do this, which right now they're not allowed to do. But we have previously proposed that home rule, the threshold for home rule, be lowered from 25,000 to 5,000. And any community over 5,000 would be able to automatically have home rule status. That's a change in the state constitution, so it requires a statewide constitutional question. We haven't been able to get that on the ballot because some leadership in the General Assembly doesn't want to see that change. The reason for 5,000 is because that's where the state has said in other places, that's the threshold. In fact, that's the threshold for having to have one of these public safety pension funds. Right. If you have 5,000 population, you have to have that fund. So what we've said is, if the state in its wisdom has used that mark, then we'll use that mark. And that does create, if that were to be adopted, that would create a number of new municipalities in the home rule status. About 267 more. And so that seems to be a good, I guess, level or threshold that would reduce it to allow more people in, but not open it wide up to everybody. Because it is available still through referendum if they really wanted to.
The thing you always hear about with home rule is they're going to raise the tax on us, they're going to raise the taxes. And yes, that does happen sometimes. The bigger portion that we have benefited from so much is being able to do like rental certifications and other things like that that you can't do otherwise. They give us statutory authority that has been so beneficial to our residents because we can impact their daily lives in their neighborhoods. And that's what they really need.
Issues like crime-free housing and
yes.
other things that can be implemented. So it's not always about revenue and taxation. Mm-hmm. In fact, it often helps a community because they can come up with other revenue sources, so they're not always going to property tax. So there's a benefit, certainly.
That's down.
Hey Brad, first of all, thanks for coming up to Lake County.
Thank you.
You were at the governor's State of the State address. From a municipality standpoint, what's your executive summary?
Can I use the same answer I had to my brother? Interesting. I said last night, had a group of legislators, and this is not, by the way, going to answer your question, but I'll get to it eventually. They said, well, what's going to be talked about? How long is it going to go? And I said, you know, I think the governor's going to talk for about 42 minutes. He's going to talk about this, 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 and this. And they looked at me and I said, write that down. I said, we'll know tomorrow. And I think it was about 41 minutes today. So I was happy about that. He covered about the things, most of the topics that I thought he would. He talked about education. He talked about some of the things we did before. You know, everybody new has to talk about what we did before. You know, we're different. This is not the same old thing, and that's bad, and this is good. Talked about some of the real financial issues, $3.2 billion structural deficit, about $15 billion in unpaid bills, and the pension issue, not just what I've talked about for the local funds, but statewide funds. So those were the main themes. And I don't think it really took, you know, a real good prognosticator to assume that that's what he would discuss. From a municipal standpoint, he didn't get into much of anything that really directly impacts municipal activity. The issue with LGDF was buried in the budget. The discussion of minimum wage is something that will impact municipalities, and he did take a victory lap on that, which is fine. It was an issue he campaigned upon, and so that was to be expected. But otherwise, it was kind of, you guys are doing okay, just keep doing it, and we're going to try to get the ship of state righted. And so from my perspective, that was a good thing. It was not an attack on municipal governments. It wasn't, we're going to come after you. It wasn't a cut on anything. It wasn't a shift of blame or pushing more mandates our way from the administration. So in my estimation, it was a good address for municipalities, primarily because we were left out of it.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Other questions? Yes, Dick.
Mayor, thank you for hosting these. These are always great. Brad, thank you for coming. Back to the home rule question. There's a public perception that home rule's probably not the best thing. I think the number is 85% of every referendum in the state has voted down the home rule situation. What do you believe the public's perception is of home rule? Why do they vote it down almost every time? And then what are the true advantages for the residents that IML wants to let them understand?
I think the reason why it gets voted down by referendum is because the city government can't spend any money to advocate for it. So it's against the law for a municipality to spend tax revenue to say these are all the good things that can come from it. And what will happen almost invariably within the last 4 weeks, or maybe the last 2 weeks prior to the election, the realtors will come in, or some special interest group will come in and say, this is bad for your community because it's going to raise your taxes. It's going to raise your property taxes. And that's the common misperception. That's not the case. In fact, communities can, by referendum, raise their property taxes anytime they want to. There is PTEL in many counties, the property tax extension limitation law. But what's missed in the advocates opposing home rule is that almost 70% of Illinois residents live in a home rule municipality. So if it's so bad, why do 2/3 of the state live within home rule? Nobody thinks about that. Now, for the folks that are opposed to it, they say, well, your taxes are going to be raised, or there's going to be all these regulations. Well, I think that there's a conflict of interest there. I mean, it's a promotion of their interest, not unlike a promotion of our interest. So it's fine that there is that promotion, but they're able to spend money to drop a mailer in or advertise and say this is bad, these are all the things that are going to happen, without saying that it happens to 7 out of 10 other people and nobody has a complaint about it. And so there's a lot of, sometimes there is misinformation, oftentimes there's a lack of information because there's not a coordinated way to really promote it as much as there is a coordinated way to oppose it. Now, those are my opinions. There are benefits to home rule, and they're very clear. And we've written a couple of books about it, and we provide those to anybody that wants to know. It's home rule versus non-home rule. Here's the pluses, here's the minuses. And we ask people to make their own decision. That's fine. We don't have a problem with the democratic process. We have a problem with misinformation and the fact that municipalities can't really involve themselves in that because they can't put the dollars in. And so, just to give you an example, when people say, well, you're going to raise property taxes. This is bad. Your taxes are going to go up. Don't vote for home rule. That's fine. I could give you the example of a community that was home rule. Because they were home rule, was able to eliminate the city portion of the property tax for 8 years. Didn't collect 1 penny of their property tax for city government purposes. Because they were able to offset their other revenues, or use their other revenues to offset that. And if you say, well, I don't believe that, well, I can tell you who did it, because I did it for 8 years as mayor. And so there are a lot of pluses to it.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but if a community is home rule and they do abuse it for whatever reason, the residents can take it back out through referendum, can't they?
Absolutely, at any time. And there have been 3 communities that have done that statewide. Large communities, in fact. In fact, the 3rd or 4th largest community in Illinois, Rockford, voted it out because they thought their local leaders got a little too carried away with it. And they've tried to put it back on, and they've said no. And that's a local decision, and that's fine.
Yes.
There is also a step, and we're coming up on our census, there's a step for communities that fall under the threshold. So if you're a growing community, you're not going to fall under 25,000. But if you were to, in the 2020 census, automatically by law in 2022, so the next statewide general election ballot after the census, there's a required question on the ballot that says, shall we retain home rule status? And if it says, if the voters say yes, then you keep home rule and you have it then by referendum. And if they say no, then you lose it because your population dropped under the threshold. So it's an interesting topic, and I don't begrudge any of the interests in it, but we do ask for some fairness in the information that's shared.
Be nice to have that in all our coverage, wouldn't it? Yes.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Other questions?
Yeah, I just got a quick question. The topic off and on of consolidation of 911. There was a topic of elimination of township forms of government. States talked about reducing the size of government, consolidating overlapping services. Does IML ever take a position on something like that when the state's talking about changing the law and forcing consolidation or eliminating taxing bodies?
Yes, and in varying degrees. So we're promoting the consolidation of these pension funds. Those are, in fact, units of government, those pension funds. So we support the consolidation of those, as we talked about at length earlier. With regard to consolidation of townships, either into counties or municipalities, we believe that the local residents should be able to make that decision. And in fact, there have been communities that were coterminous. So the city was the exact same as the township, and there was legislation that allowed them to actually eliminate the township. This is where a village, or actually a city, board, as elected, served in both capacities. So you'd have the city council was also the township board. Well, there's no reason really to have the two if they're the same people. So there have been a couple of instances where those have been consolidated. And we think that that's a local decision. We don't get into it from the municipal league standpoint. We don't get into pushing that locally. We do think that if people want to do it, they should have the opportunity to do it. But it is not something that we have been saying we need more or less number of this unit of government, or ours is better or worse than another unit of government. So we try to refrain from that and defer to the local residents, wherever that is and however it is. This is an issue that we were opposed to on the 911 consolidation because it was a one-size-fits-all kind of model for the state, and it didn't create some of the savings that were promoted, and we didn't think that it was the best thing for that, but that's a different issue. The consolidation of government services is a statewide topic. It's been from the Metro East to Chicago suburban areas. Different reasons, but that's generally the way we approach it, if I've answered your question.
Other questions? Yes. Got the microphone here.
When you're going around to those 1,200 communities, if you ask the mayors what's one of the hardest things they have to do, to govern, it's the Open Meetings Act. I have 6 trustees on my board, and if I send out a text and they respond, it's a violation of the Open Meetings Act. If a trustee comes in my office and sits down and I'm trying to update all 6 trustees during the week, I have to have 6 different conversations, because if a second trustee is there, I'm in violation of the Open Meetings Act. And it seems like this just gets more complicated every single year. When you take the training, they give you 3 or 4 answers, and you can hardly figure out what's the right thing to do and what's not, and text and emails and all that. Most of us in this region are part-time mayors, and then order to effectively govern and keep your trustees up to date, you can only talk to one at a time. So if that's 1 hour for each trustee, you just wasted 6 hours. Do you get this same complaint from any other region or
no.
Other mayors?
Never heard that one before. I hate to tell you, but you've got a lot of company on this one. So absolutely, this is a big issue. And 100 years ago, when what we call the Sunshine Laws of Freedom of Information and Open Meetings Act was enacted, it was one sentence. It was one sentence. And now it's thousands of pages. And by the way, that is one of the mandatory trainings that you have to take as an elected official. We promote that we want open government, and we believe in transparency. We want information to be available to residents, but it has to be reasonable. And we have tried to support easing the burden on local governments and local officials, either through the training, make it easier for people to understand, make it easier for people to get together and talk, not to do business, but just to be able to have the conversations like you're talking about. And the Open Meetings Act does restrict that considerably. We have legislation that we've proposed this year that quite frankly probably will not get out of committee, which will be heard next week, to allow for web posting of notices instead of the publication in newspapers. I read a newspaper, but I'm one of the few people that does anymore. And in fact, my hometown newspaper just last week stopped printing their paper in Illinois. They print it in St. Louis now, and they truck it over. And it was a daily paper. They only print 6 days a week now. So if we're going to go back to telegrams, that's fine, but I think we moved on. And the internet is a place where we can post things and have more flexibility. And we should have more flexibility to facilitate your needs to meet with folks, not take action and do business, but to be able to have conversations. So yes, that is one of, I would say, the top 3 or 4 issues that we hear from mayors across the state is the Freedom of Information Act and the Open Meetings Act. Freedom of information, FOIA, and to the extent that there's a lot of abuse to it. And you have to have a full-time person almost to deal with those requests. Sometimes they're commercial requests, somebody wanting information for their business interests. Sometimes they're nuisance requests, somebody that just wants to be difficult. And we have to be able to balance that. But it is a big issue. It is one of our core beliefs that those rules should be more reasonable, and so we do work to promote that.
A couple comments on that. Now the state legislature, when they caucus together, they have, well, the Democrats probably have 2/3 of the legislature all together caucusing. They can discuss state business and all?
Surprisingly, the General Assembly has exempted itself from the Open Meetings Act and the Freedom of Information Act.
Interesting. Okay, if there's no other questions, then we're going to wrap this up tonight. Again, Brad, thank you so much for driving all the way up to Round Lake Beach, Illinois from Springfield. And I'd like to always pass on one of our village pins to all of my guests. Thank you so very much. We wear with pride. Thank you, Brad. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you very much.